Welcome to Coffee and Policy Chats, where we gather to discuss policy facts without the partisan bull. I'm your host, Ashley C., and I love talking about public policy. I don't work for the government or any news network. I'm just someone who has studied a lot of public policy and learned to break it down to make it approachable so that you can be aware of the public policies floating around out there and make the decision that is best for you without a partisan gaze. So today we have a really good show for you. We will be discussing the Washington Post article that actually came out at the end of December, I think around December 28th, talking about OASDI, which is the Social Security and Disability Program. We also have a breakdown of kind of what that issue is around it, what the current policy is doing, and why it's essential that we update policy. But this is just a really good example of how good reporting from journalism and journalists, and why it's so important that we have freedom of the press, because journalists who are good at their job, who don't mind digging, can shine a light on some of the failures of policy that legislators have failed to take any action on, and that really hurts the public. But first, we have some quick bites, actually just one major quick bite, because the topic we have today is pretty in depth, so I want to have enough time to talk about that. But we'll just talk about the quick bites. Remember, quick bites are policy snippets that are made to be digestible. So in this week's quick bite over the weekend, that would have been the MLK weekend, it was reported that Janet Yellen, who's in charge of the Fed, has said that we are rapidly approaching our debt ceiling, and if action is not taken, we will basically default by June. So what the debt ceiling is basically, think of it as like a credit card spending limit. We can only spend so much, and then we have to, if we're good borrowers, we can raise it. So Congress, because they control the purse strings, are the ones that have to act to raise the debt ceiling. If Congress does not raise the debt ceiling, then we as a nation will default on all the debt that we owe, and that would actually destabilize not just U.S. markets, but international markets. Currently, we have a very fractured Congress, a very fractured Republican Party in control of the House. And the only reason I say that this is very fractured is because you have many different smaller groups within the Republican Party who have their own agendas. We saw this over the 15 votes that it took for them to select a Speaker of the House. It was finally Kevin McCarthy who came out on top, but he did have to make a number of backroom deals and concessions in order to get the vote of his party behind him. And then, of course, you have some people in there who are very traditionalists, understand their role within government, want to preserve the role within government, and do what they need to do. Then you have some more radical thinkers in the conservative GOP, some of them who, for lack of a better word, it does not appear that they understand the role that government plays. So their interests seem to be very self-interested, making sound bites, getting their name out there on social media so they can get reelected rather than serving their constituents. Part of their agenda is defunding parts of the government, basically stripping them bare. And this is not good, because the government provides services for us. Like, do you like clean water? Do you like to be able to breathe? Do you like having roads that you can drive on? Well, these are all things that the government does for us. And these are people who are pushing that whole QAnon conspiracy theory about how the government is, spying on regular citizens and doing all these things against regular citizens. I will give them that, the whole spying thing, because the NSA, but the NSA is not really concerned about us as regular citizens unless you're like a terrorist or something. For the most part, most of us will never run afoul of the NSA, never know anything about the NSA. But if you are a criminal or doing something illegal, you might, federally illegal, the NSA might actually tap on you, because their whole thing is to keep America safe. I don't agree with some of the powers that they have, but that's neither here nor there. And then there's this whole movement to defund the IRS, which means, nobody to audit taxes and make sure people are paying them. So there's like a lot of different factions in there. So the GOP House, there may not be a authorization that comes out of a vote to raise our debt ceiling. The implications of that is basically the government will run out of money, and according to the Fed, will run out of money in June. So why do you, as a normal citizen, care? Like, why should you care? Well, typically these debt ceiling fights can be, especially when it's this critical, they're not working today because the day of this recording, this is Martin Luther King Day, the 16th of January. And so that means they only really have Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday before we get to the point where we've met the debt ceiling and we're at risk and we're going to default. And so this is something that you should care about, because basically, typically when we have this kind of battle where it's this urgent, there's a whole thing about how some parties will try to use this to get enough leverage to cut programs, social programs such as Social Security. That is something that has been on the chopping block every time Republicans have come to hold power in the House or Senate, or even in all three. Social Security is a program that we all pay into, that we're all entitled to when we get to a certain age. And they use the line that Social Security is insolvent. Well, Social Security is not insolvent. What happened was the government borrowed a bunch of money from Social Security and they've not paid it back. So if they don't pay it back, obviously the program cannot be self-sustaining, but otherwise it is a self-sustaining program. They just need to pay their debts. They don't want to do that. So it's easier to just get rid of it than pay the debts. And it could also result in things like cuts to SNAP, which is the Supplemental Nutrition Program, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, and that's food stamps. And WIC could get WIC is also an offset of that, and WIC could get funding cut. Medicaid, Medicare could get funding cut. So these are all things that will have a very real impact on people in your life, if not you. And then also there is the fact that if we default and we run out of money and we default in June, the U.S. will get our borrowing status downgraded. And we've had that happen before. In 2011, we were downgraded into a lower tier. And so that meant that our trustworthiness was not great. It's like basically having a credit score and we no longer fall into the like best score ever. We're like downgraded into, they got good credit, but it's not great credit, right? And that was, again, because of the result of taking our sweet time to raise that debt ceiling. It did eventually get raised, but not before some damage was done. If we see that happen in June, and we run out of money, what we'll see is things like interest rates going up. So mortgage interest rates will be even higher than they are now. Car interest rates will be going higher. Banks may no longer be able to extend loans and lend money. You may see companies, because they can't, get financing the way they would normally do, companies may start to reduce their workforces in an effort to save money. So there are some real implications of this debt ceiling not being raised, and there is real implications to you and me as everyday citizens. And the answer is not simply, let's just cut the spending in the government, because there are a lot of things like, I don't know about you, but I like having people go to school. I like to know that the next generation will have, potentially some people who will be in jobs that I may need as an older person. Like, you cannot have doctors and lawyers and nurses and paramedics and firefighters and police officers if they don't attend school. And not everybody can afford to get a public or private school education, but everybody does get guaranteed a public school education. And so if they cut funding to education, that would be devastating. We are already seeing a devaluation of education by the fact that our educators can't even afford to live in the districts where they teach. They don't make a living wage. So this is going to be a big problem. And so we really need to hope that they get their act together in time to pass the thing to raise the debt ceiling, because we really don't want to see our markets plunge. And you'll hear people on the news talking about the stock markets crashing and things like that. And the truth of the matter is, for most people, the stock market, it's like, why should I care? Because the Dow and all that stuff doesn't make sense to most everyday Americans. Like, they don't make enough to even care about that. That's just so tangential. But when the markets crash, if they crash, because remember, we had one in the 1920s, 1929, which led to the Depression. Then we had another Black, I can't remember if it was like Tuesday or something like that. But anyway, it was Black Monday or something. Black Monday, I think it was, in the 80s. And the market took a real downpour. And that means that people do lose their jobs because companies have to now start reducing workforces, or some companies, like smaller businesses, will go out of business. So that's mom and pops. That's everyday small business owners going out of business. So there are some ramifications there that are far reaching. So my only hope is that they can at least work out something without cutting the programs that are also necessary for all of us to benefit from, and maybe look at some of the pork, some of their little personal pet projects within the spending bills that don't make sense, because there is quite a bit of pork when we look at what people are spending money on in government. So that's it for Quick Bites. And so now we're able to move into our main topic today. Like I said, this one's quite a large topic. This is we're going to actually do a policy analysis breakdown with this one. And this one is about OASDI, which most people don't know that program. It is the Social Security Disability Program. Basically, if you cannot work in your current occupation for health reasons, maybe you've had severe injuries that mean that you can no longer do that job, you may apply for Social Security disability benefits, which means that you can get them before you turn 67, I think is the full retirement age right now. And so you're entitled to these funds. And part of that application process is that you have to undergo this thing called a work test, where they basically go, okay, you can't work in your current industry. Can you do something else? And this probably affects more of the manual physical jobs, the jobs that we call uneducated jobs, because they don't have college degrees, more than, people who have like knowledge-based work, people who sit behind a computer desk all day and do that for a living, even though they themselves may also have to use this program. I know that there are some people who are on like the long COVID who they have memory retention issues. And so it makes it very difficult for them to perform their work, like as software engineers and things like that. So there's a number of reasons why you may need Social Security disability. But the problem that was highlighted in the Washington Post in the end of December, which really struck a nerve, was that as part of this work test, they are using the U.S. Department of Labor's Dictionary of Occupational Titles. And they are going through this book and saying, okay, well, other work they could perform reasonably are these jobs, right? But that has not been updated since 1977, like with a comprehensive update. And then there was a little bit of an effort in the 80s to update it. So the last update date that is listed on the website for it is around 1981. But a comprehensive update has not been done since 1977. So there are many, many jobs in this occupational titles dictionary that are obsolete. They no longer exist. So the part of the reason why this is so significant, and this is something that is definitely needing to have a light shined on it, is that since they use this guide, to determine if they pass there's like 5 steps and you have to pass every step, and specifically the work test, this is where some denials are resulting from. So people can be denied based on the job opportunities presented in this guide. For example, a vocational expert hired by the Social Security Administration determined that based on the occupations listed in the guide, that a 47-year-old former electrician who'd suffered from 2 strokes, which left him with speech difficulties, an enlarged heart, and violent tremors, was not able to perform his job like his actual vocation, which is electrician. That is what he's trained in. He went through all the steps to become an electrician. But he could perform 3 jobs. Nut sorter, like somebody who actually like goes and picks out the bad nuts from the good nuts. A dowel inspector, which is exactly what it sounds like. I actually had to look this up. Someone who inspects wooden dowels after they've been made. Or an egg processor. So somebody who literally will go and, you know, when you're working in like those places that process eggs after they get laid in large bulks, you can process the eggs. All of these jobs are done by machines. They have been for like 30 years. So they're virtually non-existent in 21st century United States. And then to add insult to injury, an administrative law judge. Now, an administrative law judge is who oversees like any appeals that you may have against Social Security. So if you get a claim denied, then you can go through the process of having it re-reviewed and appealing, and then it would go to an administrative law judge. Now, this judge agreed with the expert while also acknowledging that the applicant had severe impairment, stating that he still had job opportunities because this expert that they hired, the SSA hired, said he could perform 3 jobs that don't exist anymore. According to the Social Security Administration filing in that particular case, there were 130,000 positions available in nut sorting, inspecting dowels, and processing eggs. Of course, a quick Indeed search shows that this is not the case nationally at all. And the electrician then lost his case, his appeal, and was denied the total benefits that he could have been entitled to. And this was according to the Washington Post. And then I went and Googled a little bit further to see what else had happened out there. And there was a case from 2011 in the Eastern District of California. And again, this is federal court. And this is called Castillo versus Astrue. Astrue at that time was the Social Security Administration Commissioner. And again, in this case as well, titles like nut sorter were put as valid occupations for Mr. Castillo. Prior to his injuries, he had worked jobs like head custodian, closet installer. He'd worked on an oil rig, and he'd had some other very laborious jobs. And then during this particular case, the vocational expert was asked if he, meaning the judge, posed the question to the vocational expert and said, hey, if you had these injuries that Mr. Castillo had, and they were chronic and severe back pain, shoulder and leg and foot pain that cannot be sufficiently relieved with pain management. So that was, chronic pain that cannot be relieved. Could he work in the jobs that Mr. Castillo was working before? So those jobs requiring excessive standing, lifting, or any manual labor. The vocational expert in this case did agree that he could not, but he insisted there were other vocations. So we're gonna look at the actual case. Like, he actually stated that nut sorter had these significant numbers, and there were a few other titles that he'd given, but they were basically along the lines of nut sorter, mail processor, meaning that somebody who actually mail addresser, which is somebody who actually handwrites the addresses on pieces of mail to be mailed out, which we know computers with mail merge lists do that now. So there's no need for a poor secretary or administrative assistant to do that anymore. And so he said that these numbers were significant. He said that they had, it passed the work test because these jobs had more than $100,000 or 100,000 positions in the United States, even though he couldn't prove where he got the calculations. He just couldn't prove it. And unfortunately, they're not required to prove where they got the calculations or show, how they came across that. So then, of course, Mr. Castillo lost that case because they said that it passed the work test, or it failed the work test, where he can find another vocation that existed in large numbers based off of what the vocational expert and the administration examiners are saying. So this is where it gets really sticky. So in 2019, the U.S. Supreme Court hears a case about this Social Security process for disability. And they held that the Social Security judges, which are those administrative judges that oversee those proceedings, can uphold agency decisions even when vocational experts refuse to provide data on how they came up with the calculated numbers to get to that significant amount. Now, this will probably be one of the few times I agree with Justice Neil Gorsuch, just because some of his other writings I don't agree with personally, but that's neither here nor there. My personal opinions do not matter in this. But in that ruling, Justice Neil Gorsuch dissented, and he cited dubious claims that 120,000 sorter and 240,000 bench assembler positions are available in the United States to those who are disabled without providing clear evidence. So, and a bench assembler is literally somebody who they assume would sit and just assemble mechanical parts, or in this case, it was like plastic parts for hospitals, like your syringes and things like that. That is all done, again, by a machine. That is not done by an actual person. And he dissented, basically saying that these are dubious. Like, we have these numbers floating around out there. They're saying that these numbers exist, and they're not showing the data of how they even calculated this out. So how do we know that this is in fact true? And why are we denying people based off of this? So this is one of those decisions where I agree with Neil Gorsuch's dissension. I don't agree with the Supreme Court case, but basically they upheld that agencies could go along with the experts without proof, and that judges could hold that up as like, yeah, we can still use these instead of asking for more data. So let me give you a little bit of history of Social Security disability insurance. Like, I think that's one of those things that most of us do not think about. Now, it's important to note that when Social Security first came out, we did not have a disability thing. It was strictly to help provide the elderly with a means to live once they could no longer work. So that way we could hopefully uplift them out of some of the severe and abject poverty that they were experiencing during the Depression. But there are actually two Social Security disability programs. There's the Old Age Survivors and Disability Insurance. That's OASDI program. And that's operated by the Social Security Administration. That was actually signed into law and implemented in 1956 during the Eisenhower administration. And then there's the SSA disability that is part of the Supplemental Security Income, and that was implemented under Nixon in 1974. So these two programs came about much later than the initial Social Security program. Now, the main difference between the two, and I think it's really important that we understand the difference, and this is directly from the Social Security Administration website, quote, SSI targets eligible persons who have, SSI being the Social Security's income, targets eligible persons who have limited income and resources and who are disabled, blind, or aged 65 or older. Blind or disabled children as well as adults are also eligible to receive SSI benefits. The monthly benefits assist with the cost of food, clothing, and shelter. Unlike Social Security OASDI benefits, that old age survivors and disability insurance program, SSI benefits are not based off of prior work. So you don't have to have had prior work to qualify for SSI under the supplemental program. But OASDI, those benefits, the amount you're entitled to, is based off of your private work. You can actually go to the Social Security Administration website and actually see how much you would get if you retired at your retirement age based off of your last year's income. And it's a nifty little chart you can see. So back to the quote. Instead, SSI is financed by the general funds of the U.S. Treasury, personal income taxes, corporation taxes, and other taxes. The medical standards for disability are the same in both programs for individuals aged 18 or older, but there is a separate definition of disability for SSI children under the age of 18. So we are actually talking about that OASDI program, which is what we all pay into via our payroll taxes. So this is, we have payroll taxes that come out because America, we have lots of taxes, and then we have our personal income taxes that we file, and they take, hopefully you get a refund back, but if not, you have to pay more into it. But OASDI is actually something that we and our employers pay into for us as workers. So when most people are talking about disability, they are actually talking about like OASDI, not SSI, unless, they are somebody who has always been very severely disabled and never been able to work. But most people, when they're talking about like, I used to work and then I can't work anymore, that is the OASDI insurance. So I want to make sure that that is very clear. We know what we're talking about, because as we move forward, we're going to talk about a little bit of a definition here. So now I'm going to get into a brief history of the issue. This is part of that whole like breaking it down. So the Department of Labor created their DOT, that's their Dictionary of Occupational Titles, and I'll call it DOT probably for the rest of this episode, to basically catalog all of the occupational titles in the U.S. And they did this for a number of years. But then in the late 70s, early 80s, the nation's economy began to shift away from that blue collar types of jobs. So less of the physical blue collar work, things that we would consider blue collar work, to more jobs requiring knowledge workers. So like that white collar work, or service workers. So you needed knowledge and information and services. And the department, as a result, failed to prioritize any further updates of this guide. They attempted briefly in 1981, but it wasn't really a significant update. It didn't really add or enhance, and it didn't omit any like titles that were kind of going out. And so Social Security adopted the use of the Department of Labor's occupation dictionary, their DOT, to assess whether someone meets the criteria for disability payments, particularly for that determination of if the jobs exist in significant numbers criteria that someone could perform despite their challenges. And then they're in turn denying claims based off of this information. The issues with the current policy is basically that this 45-year-old publication has been rendered inaccurate and obsolete just simply due to the passage of time and the lack of effort to maintain it. And yet it is still one of the most significant documents in determining eligibility for 15 million Americans who are already receiving benefits, and then denying countless others. So according to the Washington Post article, the dictionary did have like one more initial update in 1991, but that's still basically over 30 years old. Again, I looked on the website. It looked like it hadn't been updated since 1981. So this could be, just a typo or something. And then the Social Security Administration further has a modernization project going on, and they have spent, I was floored by this number, $250 million. And there will be an estimated $300 million expenditure by the time the project finishes to modernize. Now, this has been going on since 2012. And part of that modernization is that the administration wanted to create their own dictionary with jobs that are more in keeping with our modern occupational titles and industries, as well as developing an internal, frequently asked questions, FAQ site to guide employees. But here's the rub. And this is what kills me. They're not using it. They are not using this. They are not using this guide that they supported. And they have left their antiquated policies in place. So I my jaw was completely on the floor. I was floored by this. And then this is what drives me crazy. So they got all this money to do this modernization. And they were supposed to go out and create a new directory as part of that. And they haven't really shown any progress. They haven't shown that they've made any efforts to actually use a new dictionary, to be more updated, to change their policies, or to roll this out with their employees and examiners. But Congress continues to approve more than $30 million a year, each fiscal year, for a survey of modern jobs. So they keep approving a line item in the budget for the Social Security Administration. So that way the Social Security Administration can do this survey and update this guide that they refuse to use, that they have not used, and they're not putting any effort into using. I just want that to like soak in for a moment. Like just soak in for a moment. They're supposed to be doing a survey so that way they can better serve people, their constituents, the people of this country that they're put in place to serve. And they're still not doing it and they're not using it. And this is what, like, this boggles the mind too, because they keep getting this money to do the survey because they want to be siloed. But between the Census, the U.S. Census, the Department of Labor, Social Security, and the Bureau of Labor Statistics, there is actually so much data. This is why we always say the government is very good at getting data, like government agencies, bureaucracies. They are very, very good at collecting data. They are crap at learning how to use that data. Like they just don't know how to use it. They don't know where to dig it out. So they don't have these very thoughtful data governance processes so that way they could easily just connect to something and then get it, because they have to go looking for it. And they don't actually know what's there because they haven't been thoughtful in why they collect it or how they collect it. And they have all this data available to them. They're not using it, and Congress is not really questioning it. So Congress is basically just throwing money at them, and they're not really holding them accountable for how it's being spent. And that's where my problem. Like, I don't think you should defund them. No, absolutely not. But I think that there should be some accountability there. And that's their things. So if we look at a little bit more into this, in 2011, the Social Security Administration commissioned a study, and they found that there were 11 jobs that were most cited by examiners, that in nearly 10% of those denials, the top job was that addresser position. So that addressing envelopes manually was used. And then to add insult to injury, courts have found that the Social Security's estimation of the number of outdated jobs still on the market is wildly off from reality. So courts know that when the Social Security Administration says that there are 120,000 net sorter jobs, that is not the reality. But they're still upholding these decisions made by the Social Security Administrations to deny this based off of what vocational experts are saying. And even amongst the vocational experts, they're saying there's no real good way to quantify these jobs that exist. Like, they just have to make things up. Some have actually left the position and the role because they are stating that they didn't want to make things up anymore. They're testifying and it's erroneous information. And then we go into the Social Security Administration's annual statistical report of the Social Security Disability Insurance Program. And this is from 2021. I did gather that and I will link to it. Roughly 33% of claimants are awarded benefits the first time they make a claim. But the large majority is that 33%, that first time they get it, that would, if we did a little bit of math here, that would leave about 66% who don't get their benefits the first time, so they have to go through a lengthy appeals process, and they may or may not get it at the end of the appeals. So I went to the Bureau of Labor Statistics because they actually do have an online guide, and they have the most up-to-date information on employment outlook by occupation. They update their list annually. So basically every year they go through, they look at what's out there in the marketplace, and they update this list. And that is per their FAQ on their site. And so this is up-to-date current information about occupations that currently exist within the United States today. And despite having this reliable source that's coming from another government agency, that they could use to adjudicate these claims of Social Security disability applicants, the Social Security Administration has not implemented it as part of their review process. And according to that Washington Post article, they have failed to explain why they haven't implemented the Bureau's data. So they have actually been offered the opportunity to use the Bureau's data. There has been some efforts from the Bureau of Labor Statistics to give them information, but they keep putting off and they don't want to use it. So I don't understand why So there's a couple of things I don't understand. I don't understand why we have a line item for the Social Security Administration to do a survey of modern jobs when the data currently exists and there's an agency within the government that updates that regularly. It is very easy to access. It literally took me all of like 2 minutes to Google it, pull up the page, and that was because my internet was acting a little slow that day, and look up a bunch of jobs. It doesn't take any time. It's laid out. You can type in a job title. You can just scroll through a list, or you can go based off of letter and see what exists there. So there are a number of ways to search in that thing, and it's very, very easy to use. Anybody can access it. So it's not like they would even have to go to some secret extra portal and type in some passwords. They literally could do a 30-second Google search. And then I just it baffles me why there is a need for their own. They haven't put any effort into building their own. There is something that they can already use that is currently being maintained, so they already have some sort of governance plan with it. This is when silos hurt people. This is why when bureaucracies decide to silo, it hurts people, because bureaucracies are technically supposed to be very efficient because it has a very, very clean, very hierarchical structure. You know who the chain of command is, who's next up. You know who the decision makers are very easily, and they could be very functional, but human beings have decided to make them difficult, and human beings have decided to silo because out of sight, out of mind. I don't know. So then I actually went to the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and I will call them BLS for the rest of this episode. I went to the BLS's Occupation Outlook Handbook, and I looked up some of those obsolete jobs that were cited. They had a list in the Washington Post, and I went and I looked at the actual Outlook. And I will link so that way you can go look up whatever jobs you want to, and you can see what I was looking at. Many of the obsolete jobs, which unsurprisingly, when I was Googling in that and I was looking them up on that Outlook thing, they weren't even listed. They don't exist, nor were there variants of those titles that were listed. So one could say, okay, I didn't find nut sorters, so let's look up agricultural, produce processor or something like that. And you just kind of look through things that you think could be adjacent, and you don't see anything like that. They just did not exist. It really frustrated me. I was like, oh wow. So you're probably wondering where this fits in, right? This is just one part of the process. And it is a 5-step process that they perform to determine if you are entitled to benefits. So the first one is the work test. And that is basically, have you been able to engage in substantial and gainful activity that earns more than $1,470 per month? Or if you're blind, $2,460 per month. And is your disability expected to result in death or last a duration of greater than 12 months? And if the answer is yes to that, you go on to the severity test. So basically, based off of your medical records, what your doctor submits, is the impairment or combination of impairments severe? If the answer is no, you get denied. But if the answer is yes, then you go on to the medical listings test. So does the condition meet Social Security's list of qualifying impairments? And then they look at the assessment and see if the claimant can do physically or mentally perform work with that impairment. And so if your condition is not on that list, you're probably going to get denied. And then this is where this is actually coming into. So we're looking at two things really when we're talking about a work test. At this point, there's 2 work tests at the later stages. There's the previous work test. So can you basically do your old work? So whatever your old job was, can you do that as it's generally performed? So if you're a roofer, can you still perform roofing work with a back injury, basically? Severe back pain and chronic back pain. And so the answer is probably going to be no, because you can't get up and down the ladder. You can't do whatever else you need. You can't lift things that are too heavy. You probably can't bend for long periods of time. So the answer is probably no. So if you pass that previous test that you can't perform the work as it's generally performed, then you go into the other work tests. And that's where that DOT handbook comes in. And basically, there are 3 questions. Can an adjustment be made to other work that exists in significant numbers in the national economy? So if they are saying that this other job exists, can you do that basically with accommodations? So if you're allowed to sit, if you're allowed to, take frequent breaks, could you do that job? And then there are special rules for older applicants who are found to be disabled with limited physical work experience, skills, and education. And this is the crucial thing. This is why they hire these vocational experts. The government actually bears the burden of proof to show that the job is available in significant numbers. So then they hire these vocational consultants to figure it out, and then the vocational consultants come back and say, yes, it has this many jobs, right? And so if we take it by nationwide, there should be this many jobs in this person's area. There's no mention on how they got to that number or where they looked for that number, or even if they did a basic Indeed, LinkedIn, whatever job board you're using, search to get to these numbers. It's literally it's like the wizard behind the curtains. They take the information, they go do something with it, they bring it back, and they're like, here you go. Boop, magic. I'm going to wave my wand and you're going to get the jobs. There's going to be 100,000 jobs for these obsolete things that haven't existed in over 40 years. It's so baffling. And nobody's sitting there going, well, where's the proof? Where did you look this up? I have to show more proof of things for my job. If I'm trying to say, here's the common functions of a role. If I'm making a recommendation about something, I have to show the proof that I did my research. I have to link back to the research. I have to explain how I got to that conclusion. And I have to show more proof on something that does not affect people like Social Security disability than a vocational expert does, who's being hired. It's an outside consultant who's being hired by these agencies to help adjudicate these claims. I don't know. That's just so weird to me. So you may be asking, like I did, has there been any revisions to this process, to how disability is done? And so I went to congress.gov and I looked, because there is actually a subcommittee on Social Security. And I looked to see if there are any bills that made it through the committee to the floor. There have been a significant number of bills that actually have been introduced around Social Security and OASDI in just the last decade. And there was one, including to update the list of eligible diagnoses to add ALS, so amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. I think people call it Lou Gehrig's disease. So apart from that bill to add ALS to the list of eligible diagnoses, the rest are listed on congress.gov as having been introduced. And if you consider the age and where they were in the process, you can assume that they've died. They never hit the floor. They just died. They died in committee, basically. So there has been no real concerted effort to reform Social Security disability at all. And that could just be a matter of policy, priorities. And honestly, this is not the one that gets the attention. It's not the big flashy bills. It's just one of those basic business things, so those aren't the flashy ones. But as part of any good policy analysis, we start looking at alternatives and things that we could propose instead and making recommendations based off of that. So now these are just my personal thoughts based off of the information that I had at the time I did this episode and the digging that I was able to do. And my biggest recommendation would be that they change how they review the claims. I'm not saying to eliminate the 5-step process at all. I understand why those things exist. But if we focus on specifically that other work test and the tools that they're using, I say they need to change the tools. they've spent all of this money on modernization, but they failed to solve a very fundamental function of their agency's function. Like, how do we, like, their fundamental job when evaluating claims and when administering programs within Social Security is, this is their fundamental function. How do we accurately and reliably deliver the best results to the people in need of our services? That is literally their main job. They need to make sure that they are accurately and reliably delivering the best results, meaning the results that will help the most people and do the least bit of harm for the people who need their services. And so they've spent money on creating their own updated directory of occupations. And that just, to me, seems like a waste, because they won't change the other work tests. They haven't changed it. They spend money to hire consultants who are using the DOT and then not showing how the calculation of those jobs was done. So in my opinion, the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, already has something in place. So it's just a matter of basically one agency using the data that's already readily available by another agency and switching over to that. That means there's going to be a little bit of change management with how things are done, but like, why spend money you don't have to, kind of thing, because that would be the most effective way to deliver these services. And if we're going to look at the implications for that change, because obviously if we make a policy recommendation and I'm saying change the tool, right? We have to consider how that would impact the people that are being are part of this process. So the examiners themselves, who are integral in this process, would have to be trained on the new process. They would have to be trained to go look in the BLS, to stop using the DOT. And they also have to be held accountable for this new process. So once you train them, provide all the resources they need, but hold them accountable. Like, where did you get this information from? Did it come from the updated thing? Are you still using outdated information? Like, tell me where you got it. Because the BLS also gives you an outlook. It also gives you an estimation of how many jobs are available based off the data that they collected. So you can see like, oh, last year there was this many jobs off of it. So that's why I say it's an estimation, because you can say, oh yeah, last year it was this many jobs. So if we're being fair, we could probably estimate that it's plus or minus 5 or 10%. And you could still say, oh, this is significant. Oh, it's not. And then the Social Security Administration Commissioner is the person who's ultimately responsible for making sure that the folks working within the agency understand where they should be getting their information, and that if they should hire vocational consultants, those vocational consultants should also be very transparent in their sources. So like, tell people, provide information on how you got the data. How did you get to this number? How did you determine that this is a significant amount of jobs in this occupation? Like, it shouldn't be this like, oh, I get the information, I go do something over here, and then it's all in a black box, and here you go, I give you this page, a piece of paper, and this is what I found, this report, and it doesn't say anything about how I got there, so there's no transparency. And then the law also needs to be changed. So this would fall in Congress again, and it would need to be changed so that the way the administrative judges who oversee the Social Security appeals would support the need, like their processes would support the need for that accuracy, reliability, and that transparency. So basically this would require Congress to act and make a call and choose to take up this matter. And I know this is not one of the sexy policy matters out there. It doesn't get the sound bites, but this is something that is absolutely needed by Americans. And this is something that should be very important to them because it affects their constituents and their ability to live. And the judges should be able to say, hey, like, the new law requires that you be transparent and show us how you arrived to this. So where did you get your information and how did you get to this number? I mean, if we're going to talk in terms of sociology, they always say common sense is not a thing in sociology. But I really want to say that it's like common sense, or, it just makes good sense. Like, you should be able to show your work. Like, your teachers in school have always told you, show your work so you can get full credit. Like, show your work. Like, that should not be hard. Not if you're doing it. Not if you're doing it the right way. You should be more than willing to say, yeah, here's all the data I pulled, and here's how I came to this conclusion. Here's how I did the calculations. I mean, we have to show more work when we're in college, or in, heck, elementary school kids have to show more work. My husband is a high school math teacher. His kids have to show more work about how they get to calculation. And then I think probably the biggest thing, because we're saying like, oh, it should be common sense. They should be showing their work. They should be transparent. It should be reliable information. They should be using the most up-to-date information. But how do we actually like enforce this in the agency, right? And that would be where we have to set up provisions for oversight. Congress really should be overseeing this. Like they have a subcommittee for Social Security, and there should be oversight. There should be regular audits of the claims that have been denied or approved, any claims that have been adjudicated and examined, and their results, with the supporting documentation to show that they were using the current outlooks, that they were transparent in their calculation methods and sources, at least to the agency. I'm not saying you have to show all of this work to the person applying, because they may not understand it. They may not understand what they're looking at, but at least to the agency should be able to say, yep, here's all the supporting data. This is why I made this decision, because here's all my supporting data showing my work again. And so there should be some oversight. There should be audits, and there should be this trust that they are doing their job and that the results of their determinations are valid. And the truth of the matter is that, like, you know, some people get it on the appeals. Usually when people defend themselves, they're not as successful, but usually if they can hire a Social Security attorney, they tend to be very successful, and they can get back pay and things like that. But not everybody can afford an attorney. So it's mind-blowing, because it's actually not doing the most good for the greatest amount of people. And you're talking about, like, these are not small numbers. If you think about 15 million people who are currently being approved and getting their benefits on the first try, or 33% get it on the first try, and we say like 66% are not, that's not a small number at all. That's quite a few Americans. So you're probably wondering why you should care. What is the whiffin? What is in it for me? Why should I take any interest in this? And I say this because whether or not you need Social Security now or in the future, or you need disability benefits now or in the future, these agencies, these bureaucracies were founded and given a charge to act in the best interest of the public. But they're using outdated information to determine if someone is truly disabled and unable to work. And that's not just ridiculous. That's a grave failing of policy. That is a grave failing. The world has shifted, so that they need to shift with it. And I know government is slow. I know that government is slow. I know bureaucracies are very slow to change, but that doesn't mean that it can't be done. It may take some time, but it doesn't mean it can't be done. And the thing is that they've known this is coming. They've known this need existed. That's why they are trying to get money for modernization. But the policy just hasn't caught up, because nobody has taken this on. And none of us knows when we or someone we care about will need to access these benefits. And not everyone can afford to hire legal counsel to help them fight. Some people really have no choice but to represent themselves in their appeals. And it should not be difficult and convoluted to understand. Like, it should not, but it is. And I know that policy, and I'm the first to say this usually, policy is an iterative process. But we've had so many years to change this and to work in that iterative way. We know that this is not working as is. We know that this needs to change. It's just that somebody needs to stand up and do it. And people who make these laws and policies need to care. Like, they really need to care enough to push this through and work with each other. There really should be an effort to hold Social Security accountable. Like, there should be. And not continue to sink money into projects that are not showing results, and not asking these questions about, well, how are you spending this? Like, what is happening with this project? These processes are failing people, and they should have to work more collaboratively with the other agencies to get the information they need, especially if it exists. And instead of hiring experts who many of these experts themselves agree there's no valid way to determine these outlooks for occupations that are obsolete. The BLS has up-to-date data. It tells you the occupation's outlook. It tells you what it's going to look like in 10, 20 years from now. And it's readily and easily accessible. Any human being can go to this website and get this information. So I find it very hard to believe that an examiner cannot go to this BLS online, look at it in addition to the other things that they do, and find occupations that could maybe pass the other work test that exist. It took me less than 5 minutes to look up 5 to 10 occupations. So there's no reason you can't say it's not because they don't have the time, because it does not take that much additional time. It is not a long and convoluted thing to get through. It's very easy to navigate. But ultimately, what it boils down is to this. Like, it's not been a priority for legislators. Some want to do away with like all these entitlement programs that we all pay for. But this is serious. And this is out in the open now, thanks to the Washington Post and their reporting. And this is, again, one of those really great examples of what happens when journalism is allowed to flourish and really dig, because there are some really good journalists out there that are totally different than the opinion pieces and talking heads who do this old school journalism where it's like basically detective work and shine a light on policy failings. And I really hope that, I know that they're back, and I'm probably like pie in the sky thinking here. I hope they don't spend time bickering on or pointless investigations, though, you know, they've already announced in the House that they're starting a number of investigations that are going to lead to nowhere, and it's going to be Benghazi all over again, because basically it's not really necessary. It's just basically they want to tarnish somebody's political chances, so it's a waste of time. But I really hope that at least they can get the commissioner, the Social Security Administration commissioner, in front of the Social Security subcommittee, because they need to have them testify about what the problem actually is, so we can understand the depth of the problem, and they can draft and implement new policy solutions to solve this problem and to do what the public charge is, which is do the most good for the most amount of people. Anyway, that is it for today's episode. If you liked it, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe, do all the thingies. If you think somebody else could benefit from hearing this, referring it to a friend would be great. Thank you for hanging in there with me, and I will see you on the next one. We drop every other Wednesday, so I will see you in 2 weeks. Bye.